we had talked about how to sequence work and how important that is. It's interesting because this whole concept of estimation, for whatever reason, I go on LinkedIn quite a bit, probably more than I should, but I have some people I follow, and there's some people I follow who believe that we shouldn't do estimates at all. And I disagree with them. So, but there's a lot of confusion about it, honestly. When we get into principles of product development flow, we'll talk about this more. But it's mathematical in the sense that, yeah, you might get the estimates wrong, but how do you choose what to do next, right? In the complex world, how do we choose what to do next? That's really what that exercise was on Thursday, is saying, hey, to the best of our knowledge, here's the things that have the most value. Here's the things that take the most effort or the least amount of effort. We want to do the things that have the most value and least effort. Does that mean you're going to be right? Absolutely not. We want to kind of take these terms of right and wrong. This is my editorial comment. You're going to take these things about right and wrong. We want to get them out of our head. They don't really belong in the complex world. Okay. And it's tough for us as human beings. We tend to be binary thinkers. I'm sure there was a huge evolutionary advantage for it when we were evolving as a species. But the issue is complexity didn't exist really back then when we were evolving. So we have a brain that's built for the simple and the complicated world. We're living more and more in the complex world. We have to, in some cases, do things that are counterintuitive. One of those things is forget about right and wrong. It's good and better is what we're looking for. Okay. So anyway, I want to talk about Scrum because we said, hey, we started on Tuesday. We said, hey, we got this great thing. It's called Agile. It's great. This wonderful philosophy, which most people agree with. It's very rare that I run into organizations that say, hey, I don't agree with this, right? There's nothing disagreeable in there. How do we make it part of our everyday? Scrum is a great way. Scrum's not the only way, but Scrum's the way we're going to teach in this class. And the reason we're going to teach Scrum in this class is you can get certified for it. I guess you can get certified for Lean and other things, but Scrum is a big one. And some of you, will get jobs as Scrum Masters, hopefully, or product owners. Those are Scrum things. So on day one, we talked about the Scrum framework simplified. 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, developers. You got a bunch of other people who are interested in what the Scrum team is doing. I'm going to call them stakeholders. Just makes it easy. Now I only have 4 I got to worry about. People have ideas all the time. Enhancements, ways to make your product better. I'm going to talk particularly about software development. I'm going to let you guys translate it. It's just software development is what I know. I got ideas for enhancements. I've got a software product. I want to make it better. I got a software product that has defects, bugs. I want to remove those, hence make it better. Right? I take everything that I can do to change that product. I'm going to put it on a backlog. I'm going to give it to a product owner. Product owner is going to put it on a backlog. On a regular basis, the team is going to get together and they're going to do an exercise similar to what we did on Thursday. They're going to say, hey, we can't do everything on this list. What should we do next? Because next is important, because when is important in this agile world, in this complex world we live in, because some things have high value and low effort, and some things have low value and high effort. We should be doing the former. So let's get these things in an order that we recognize. So that is what I like to refer to. It's one of the refinement activities. I refer to it as backlog refinement, the overall span of work that we may or may not do in the future. Let's get together and put it in the right order. Once we have it in that order, we're going to refine the work starting at the top, stuff we're going to do next. We're going to get a little bit more detail from it. When we went through the exercise on Thursday, did you have a lot of detail on the work? No, didn't need it. We didn't want to go into detail because what's the sense in going detail on everything in the entire body of work if you're not going to do it for some time? Because when is important. So we're going to get things in order. And once we have them in order, we're going to spend some time really figuring out what these things mean, right? And that is a refinement activity. We generally call those things that we put on the backlog stories, which we'll talk about either today or tomorrow. I need to know something about those stories, right? We're going to do that during story refinement, which is another one of those refinement activities. Once we have that, we have the sequence, we know in detail what we might do in the short run. We're going to actually plan the short run. We're going to take those things that we can do in a sprint, and we're going to put them into a secondary backlog, right? Later we'll call it a batch, a secondary batch, a smaller batch, which is called the sprint backlog, which basically says you have a sprint, which is nothing more than time. And a sprint by definition is 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks. I believe, I don't know. I don't know if they took that out of the Scrum Guide. I didn't look for that yet, but that's what it used to be. And obviously I don't see many places that do longer than 2 weeks these days. Sometimes they do 3 weeks. Okay. And I'm going to say, what can I fit into that bucket? What can I fit into that time frame? And I'm going to put it in my sprint backlog, because I'm going to concentrate on that work, and I'm going to forget, to a certain extent, forget about the other things on the backlog, other than to refine them in advance of the next sprint. And then we're going to start the sprint, and then every day we're going to get together and we're going to say, hey, how's it going? That's the daily Scrum. Some people sometimes refer to as daily stand-up, because one of the things they do is, it's supposed to be a short meeting, so they figured if they got people to stand up, it would be shorter because they get uncomfortable, right? These days we're all sitting down anyway, so daily stand-up doesn't make any sense. Plus, that's not what it's really officially called. It's called daily Scrum. When we get to the end, we're going to have some work done. We should have some work done. We should have some work. We're going to have something called a definition of done that meets that definition of done, that meets that acceptance criteria. Say, this work is done. We could deliver it today if we wanted to. In fact, you could deliver it before the end of the sprint if you wanted to. You can deliver it once it's done. Our stakeholders and the people that we care about, they haven't seen us doing this. They're not with us every day. We're going to show them. We call that sprint review. Pretty simple concept, right? The funny thing is, it's so simple, is the people who've done this before realize how difficult it is to actually do. But if you're brand new to Scrum, you're saying, man, this is real simple, Larry. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's really simple. And then we have one more thing we're going to do. It's called a retrospective. When all of this is done at the end of the sprint, we're going to get together and we're going to say, how could we have done it better? Basically, that's it. And I showed these things as boxes, and I keep threatening to change this. Jim will write me a note after. Larry, you said you're going to change this. They should be circles. These are feedback loops, right? We got all these feedback loops. And that's all Scrum is I would refer to it, you think about it, as ceremonialized feedback. Why do we need ceremonialized feedback? So we can be safe in the complex world, because feedback is what keeps us safe. So let's set up a framework that gives us a lot of opportunity for feedback. And because we have that opportunity for feedback, we reduce risk. Which is why I don't talk about risk, because guess what? Risk mitigation is built into the framework. It's not built into waterfall, which is why we have to manage risk, call out risk separately, have separate risk meetings, blah, 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 blah. I don't like talking about risk. Then you have this person called a Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master is a person who needs to understand all of this and make it happen, or not make it happen, but make sure it happens, I suppose. Right? And understands it, so that they can help guide the product owner, can help guide the developers into making sure that this is not just done on a regular cadence, but it's done effectively. That's it. It's really simple, right? I'm a generally, I think I'm like most human beings, but I'm a generally lazy person. Maybe I'm lazier than the other ones, but this is really simple stuff. It's not rocket science. Actually getting people to do it, maybe that's rocket science. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind as we're going through this. Any real questions while I'm getting my next slides up here, or my next materials ready? You see anything in there? There's a lot of chat. You guys are talking, you're chatty. A lot of people were asking questions about Reading, because we do have a syllabus, and I recommend that you try to keep up with it. We're not going to make you read it. We're not the reading police or whatever. We're not going to go break into your homes and see if you have the books. My son finished his first year of high school today. He was the big book that they were reading was Fahrenheit 451, where they break into your house and actually steal your books and burn them. We won't do that either. Scrum Guide is on your list. This is really important to read and understand because it's going to be part of your test. Those folks are going to take certification. It's an open book test. You should have this open. How do you get there? Well, I just type in, Scrum Guide into Google, and it gives me some links. And one of them is scrumguides.org, which is this thing that you're seeing here. Juan Carlos, you have a question. You had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Larry. Can you give us an example of the definition of done, like a real world example?
We'll get to it. Hold on to it. I certainly have to cover it. So if I click on that, I can open up the PDF. I can open up the online Scrum Guide. So I opened up the PDF over here. I think you can see it. We're going to spend a little time with this. I know you all can read, and I know you're all going to read it. I'm going to point out the things that I think are important because it's changed too, by the way. It changed in November of 2020, so it's new. So I still have yet to really go through and commit to memory all the new stuff in here. It's 14 pages. 14 pages, and that includes this page, which is nothing. So it's really 13 pages. And that includes the acknowledgments, which is the last page. So it's really 12 pages. You're all pretty smart people. You can read 12 pages and understand it. How long is it going to take you? Not very long, right? I could read it to you verbatim. Wouldn't take the whole class, right? I'm going to go through it just briefly as it sits here, just so you become familiar with it, and it might jog some things in my head. And then I'm going to do some drawings. I don't have slides for this stuff that I do on days 3 and 4. I start with the purpose. And then, now I've got index, which again, this is not really content. So now I'm down to about 10 pages, right? It's an order. So we have a definition. You can read the definition, don't have to go into it. As I was looking through it this morning, again, just to kind of refresh my memory, I was reading this. Scrum is simple. Scrum was empirical in the sense that they just tried different things, and then they kept what worked and got rid of what didn't work, kind of thing. And that is a good spirit of Agile. Try different things, see if they work. If they don't work for you, try something else, right? It's simple. Try it and determine if it works for you. All it is a framework. And this is the part that people got to understand. When you're reading through this, especially those who have been involved or had some experience or knowledge of Scrum prior to this class, which is a lot of you, don't notice what's not only what's in it, notice what's not in it. Story points of value. I don't think they're in here explicitly, right? There's all kinds of things that people have put into and say that's Scrum or not Scrum. This is Scrum. What's in the Scrum Guide is Scrum. That's what, the same thing that kind of annoys me when people say this is Agile or this is not Agile. Agile is the philosophy. If it aligns with the philosophy, it's Agile. I don't care what you're doing, right? I think we just do that as human beings. Again, we tend to think in black and white. It's incomplete by design. It's only a framework. You're going to have to figure some of this stuff out by yourself. Jim and I were talking earlier. We have a mutual friend, and some of you know him as well, and probably friends with him. His name is Fred Fowler. He's just coming out with a new book soon, and he's the one who's doing some of the case studies. I know Jim is creating his own as well, but he's coming out with a case study book. We talked about some of this stuff and the fact that there's a difference between being a cook and being a chef. Right? Being a cook means you follow directions. Being a chef is you understand what you're cooking. You understand what the ingredients are. So if you run out of nutmeg, you can substitute it with something. I'm not a chef. I don't know what to substitute with it. I was a good cook because I followed directions. I used to cook all the meals for the family, and then my wife would come up to me and say, "Well, can you substitute this for can you take this out of the recipe?" I said, "I don't take anything out of the recipe. I just follow orders. I can't do it. I don't know what will happen if you make me take this out. I'm going to follow directions." And I was good at following directions, and things were tasted good at the end. But that didn't mean I knew what the heck I was really doing. I was just going through the motions. So it's incomplete. You're going to have to figure things out. Use this as a framework. Use the philosophy behind it and figure things out for yourself. Scrum theory is based on empiricism, and they talk about transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Sometimes you'll see people, I don't know where this comes from. It's amazing how some ideas take root in people's consciousness, because I think it's because it's in SAFe. So they show the 3 pillars. These are the 3 pillars. And then they show, Roman Gothic architecture. Scrum values will be on there. That's an easy one to get. This is an open book test. What are those values? Commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. I think they make sense. The one that speaks to me always is courage. It will take courage to do this, because chances are you're working in an organization that doesn't do this. Chances you're working in an organization that don't understand what you understand, or will understand after you finish this class. It takes courage to move forward and do this, to try new things, to experiment, because that's not the way we're built. We're built as human beings to have the answers, and people in management are built to have the answers, and the organization is looking to them for answers. But problem is, in the complex world, you don't have answers. And even if you got the perfect answer, it doesn't stay perfect. You need to have a lot of courage in order to do this. And the people who are part of this need to have courage. Because if you get to the end, when we talk about retrospective, where you're supposed to come up with things to do differently, and you don't have the courage to do things differently, you're not going to get very far. So that's the one that speaks to me the most, but that's a gimme. There's a couple gimmies in here when you get to the test. Scrum team, it talks about the Scrum team, and it talks about the individuals and what they do. I'm not going to go over everything in the Scrum guide because I don't want to insult your intelligence. I know you can read. I'm not going to read everything to you. The events we've talked about. You get the sprint itself is considered an event. It's really an event, but it's a placeholder for the other events. A sprint, and generally being 2 weeks these days, is like almost the average length of time. But it could be a week. It wouldn't make sense to be like 10 days or something, right? Because the calendar doesn't work that way. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks usually. What do? We do sprint planning. We do the 15-minute daily Scrum. We do the review and the retro. It looks just like my little slide. We have some artifacts that we do. This is new, by the way. I talked for years about a Scrum goal or a sprint goal. They've added to it, actually, something called a product goal. So you want to understand that. Basically, the product backlog has a goal. The sprint backlog has a goal. The piece of work you're doing, which they refer to as an increment, has a definition of done. All of these things are ensuring that we're staying focused on the things that we need to do for the product overall, for the time period, which is the sprint, and then for the work within the sprint. That's all. You can think of it as simple recursion. I've never been as big, and this is something that I have to make a confession to on sprint goals. Product goals is new. They just introduced that in November. I was never big on sprint goals because I always felt that if you do a good job of sequencing your backlog and planning your sprint, that the goal is pretty implicit in the work that you're doing. But we all can get better at things, so I'm trying to get better at sprint goals. The reason you have a sprint goal is there was a time, and I don't, and maybe it's still in the back in the Scrum guide, where you might actually cancel a sprint. And you cancel a sprint when you cannot attain your sprint goal. If it's still in the Scrum guide, great. That's a give me. There'll be a question on the test for it, probably, about who can cancel a sprint goal. Why do you cancel sprint goal? I didn't double check this morning. Maybe it's no longer in there. I've been doing this for 10 years. I never canceled a sprint. So I always said, not that they would listen to me, but if somebody did, I would say you're wasting valuable ink on talking about canceling a sprint when most people never cancel a sprint, right? You're wasting valuable real estate. Jim, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think I heard you say you can't, the time that a sprint is canceled is when you can't attain the sprint goal, but the correct definition, as I understand it, is the only time you cancel a sprint is if the sprint goal becomes obsolete. In other words, all of a sudden we're building a product the market doesn't want, or that there's a new approach we're going to take that's completely different and makes this approach no longer make sense. It's not that you can't attain the goal, but that it doesn't make sense to go after it anymore.
Yeah, you're probably correct in that, because it's one of those things that I remember I said, I always thought that this whole cancellation thing, since I've never done it and I never thought it was appropriate, was a waste of space. I probably just moved it out of my brain real estate. So you're probably right. We have a product backlog, and it talks about the product backlog. It talks about the product goal, it talks about the sprint goal, and then it talks about sprint backlog and the sprint goal, it talks about the increment, it talks about definition of done, and that's it. So I don't even see cancel in here anymore. If somebody finds it, maybe it's in the small print, right? Maybe it's no longer there. I don't know. Either way, you guys.
Jerry, it is there.
I just wanted to go and show you, hey, look, not very intimidating, pretty easy to read. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take what they've written there, and I'm going to tell you how, in some ways, I operationalize it. I'm not going to tell you everything, because we're going to do this, try to get this done in 2 days so we can get on to the other stuff, right? Actually, it's 3 days. I cheat because the BDD stuff is part of it. And then they have some acknowledgments, and I want to hang on this for a little bit, because I love you guys. I love the Job Hackers. I love this community that we've built together. Jeff McKenna is one of the people that is under the acknowledgments. Jeff is a friend of the Job Hackers. He did a CSM with Sasha. I think it was the first one with the last class or the class before. And he's been a speaker at our meetup. And I'm trying to get him to maybe volunteer with Job Hackers as well. He ran the first Scrum team for Jeff Sutherland. Pretty interesting guy. He's here in the Bay Area. The other thing that's interesting about the Scrum Guide is that it's translated into a bunch of different languages. And this is the reach of the Job Hackers. 2 of those translations are by Job Hackers. The official Thai translation, the official Indonesian translation are by Job Hackers. Let me start with this. I did a slide one time because my chicken scratches are so poor. I see people who've taken the class before laughing. This is really more an auditory than a visual class, because I'm going to start talking and I'm going to start scrolling some stuff down, and it's going to be really, you're not going to be able to read it. One of the very first things when we talk about the Scrum team, and I think is important. So let's say I get hired for a new job, which happened recently. I can almost remember. When I'm walking into an organization as a coach, they're asking me about Agile and Scrum. One of the very first things we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at the teams. Because usually, I think, I can't remember if, I'm sure it's not happened because I've worked at a bunch of different places and done this for a long time where the teams weren't formed yet. But usually I walk in, when I walk in the door, and when you walk in the door, the teams will already be formed. And this I won't say this is problematic, but this is just the way the world is. And the way those teams were formed, they're probably formed by people who were excited about doing Agile and Scrum, which is good. But maybe didn't have the experience that you and I do. And so they're going to put teams together, and the teams probably themselves will not be optimal. And one of the really tough things about this job is, and I've said it very frequently, that I think for this particular class, I'm speaking to you all because you're all smart people, but I expect you to be leaders in organizations, whether it be Scrum Masters, coaches, et cetera, and hopefully change the tide of this. But as a Scrum Master or a product owner, or even the team, you can do 100 things right, and it only takes one person in power to do one thing that's not optimal. You can be perfect in 100 ways, and it only takes one decision by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing to really screw things up. And one of the decisions that will kind of screw things up, we're just talking as friends here, right? One of the things that's really going to screw things up is how they form the teams. Because they're going to form the teams, and they're going to treat people the way that they've always treated people, which is in the complicated and the simple world, people are resources. I need X number of resources, right? It makes people sound like machines, and we know that people are not machines. People who do knowledge work, they're not just, things that we can manipulate and manage even in this complex world. So they're going to make a lot of decisions on team composition that are going to put a lot of headwind on you, and you're going to have to swim upstream a lot. So that's one of the very first things that I'll look at as a coach and as a Scrum Master, is I'm going to start making some suggestions on team composition and how we can improve it. So years and years ago, came up with what I called 5 elements of a good Scrum team. And I wrote a blog about it. So I put these here and I put them on the slide so you could actually read it, because people were saying, what the heck was he writing before? So I'll start with that and get that out of the way before I start scribbling on my pad. And these are in order, I would consider these in order of importance. So as you're making trade-offs, keep this in mind. I might, because of some of the things I've seen recently, I might change the order and put cross-functional in a different place. I might move it up in the list because of what I've seen recently. Regardless, small. We talked about small on day one. Small teams in the complex world actually outperform large teams. This is something we should be excited about if we're financially conscious, because we can actually do more with less. Another thing that I see a lot of times when I go into organizations is they keep wanting to talk about scaling. What you really need to do first is descale. It's not that they don't have enough people, it's that they have too many people, right? Because we know when we have too many people in the complex world, that means that we have all these people we have to, manage and work on getting the feedback right in the system. And there's just too many people to get all the feedback to everybody. So you have meetings with 50 people and they last for an hour and nothing gets said or done that's really consequential. I mean, we've all been in them. Everybody's shaking their head. We've been in those meetings, right? You can't have too many people. Small is critical, but it's also a good thing. It's a power. So what does small mean? We talked about in day one. 2 PT is what Amazon uses. If you can't feed the team with 2 pizzas, they'd have to be pretty large ones, because I've seen some of the developers I worked with. But if you can't feed them with 2 pizzas, it's too big, right? That's their rule of thumb. I say once you get into double digits, it's too much. If you're looking around, there's about 10 people in the room, cut it in half. And this is one of the reasons why I say in most organizations, I could double their net profit in 2 years. It would take 2 years because sales would have to catch up to our productivity. But the reason that we could be more productive and deliver more value is we would just start cutting the large teams into smaller teams. And we'd be able to deliver pretty much just as much work per team, but we'd have more teams. So we'd have more value being delivered. This is critical. So that's the first thing I'm going to look at. I'm going to walk into the door and I'm going to look, and it doesn't take long. They're going to give me an organizational chart or something like that. I'm going to look and I'm going to see the teams, and there's going to be 12 people on the team and say, cut this one in half. And, maybe 10% of the time they listen to me. Co-located. Co-located, meaning Zoom is okay. When I look out and we're having, it's kind of a one-way conversation But even then, I can see your faces. I get feedback from you. Feedback is critical in complex systems. The more complex the work, the more feedback is essential. How many people, some of you I know have been on the Zoom calls, right? At work, some of you have either been working or are working now. You're on the Zoom call. Nobody turns on their camera. There's so little feedback in that. If we're going to do this thing where we don't go into the office in person, you better start turning your cameras on. This is my advice to you. Else eventually they're going to make us go back into the office. It's the truth. Because there's so much communication is nonverbal communication. Co-located is not just our ability to see each other and do things like on a whiteboard and have that feedback. It's also, you can't be sleeping when I'm awake and vice versa. The number of organizations, you know, I've got some of my comrades from PG&E here. I'm not looking for work, but if I were looking for work and then somebody said we run an onshore offshore model, not even sending my resume in anymore. Not worth it. It just doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is not that the people on either side are competent or incompetent. It could very well be, but that's not the reason. The reason is that there's no communication. It takes twice as long or 3 times as long. The quality of the work that you do is less because you're not communicating, because this is the complex world. If I could just say, go do something, and I could give you instructions and you could do it and you don't need feedback, it's no longer complex work. You want to offshore complicated work? By all means, do it. Right? In fact, you can do anything you want, by the way, because I'm just telling you what I think you probably should do, but you can do anything. I love it when people say, can we do that? Yeah, of course. You can do whatever you want, right? Anyway, so the reason being is when we'll get to this, when we talk about cost delay and cycle time, is it just doesn't, it's just not optimal. Can you do it? Sure. Will software get written? Sure. Right? People buy it? Probably. But that's not optimal. So anyway, enough on that one. So co-located, basically that you and I are inhabiting the same space at the same time. Third one is dedicated. Here's the other thing that there's a difference between what would be considered product management and project management. When you're creating something complex like software, it's a product. How you manage a product is different than how you manage a project, but most companies have PMOs, project management organizations. So they became really good at what I would consider project management, or at least if they're not very good, they've set up a whole infrastructure for it. And so what you do in a project is you say, okay, we're going to create this amorphous team around this project, which is just an arbitrary amount of work that we gave an accounting code to, and they're going to work on it. And once they're done, we're going to take that team, we're going to split them up. That's not good. You know, I think I showed that on Thursday, that when you split the team up, they have to come back together because communication and feedback is so important for the team. They're going to have to figure out how to communicate and do things. When you take someone from a team, generally what I've seen, and you'll see this, is your productivity or velocity goes down for a short period of time, right? Because you no longer have this person. But when you add somebody to a team, the same thing happens, which is really weird, because if I were digging ditches or doing something physical and I add somebody else digging a ditch, I'm just going to dig more ditches. And that's the way management thinks. I'm just going to throw bodies at it. When you put somebody new on a team, your productivity goes down because you have to figure out how to communicate with that person. You have to train that person because it's knowledge work. You can't just hand them a shovel and say, dig. So really having a dedicated backlog and having a team dedicated to that backlog is really important, because in project management, they're just resources. So I have Griffin. I see Griffin on my screen. Griffin is a super developer, and he's on 4 different teams. It doesn't work well because Griffin's going to have to figure out how to work with all of those teams, right? It's much, much better to create a team with Griffin on it and bring the work to Griffin and his team via the backlog. So I don't care if you want to continue to do fiscal project management, which is not optimal, but basically saying I'm going to take a bunch of enhancements and put them under a certain accounting code. But when you do that, take that work and put it into a backlog for an existing backlog for an existing team, keep them dedicated to that backlog. Griffin cannot work on 4 backlogs. If he does, he's going to have context problems because every time he's shifting, and it takes time to shift in the world, but I would assume in the physical world, there's not that problem, right? Every time that you have to shift your mind, context shifting, it takes like 15 minutes to half an hour to get back into what you were doing, which is another reason we don't want to interrupt people when they're doing knowledge work, right? You ever been deep in thought about doing something, which is really what programming is? It's a lot of stuff in short-term memory going back and forth, and somebody interrupts you, right? It takes you a while. You were in flow. It takes you a while to get back in flow. Now imagine that you're working for 4 different teams. You never get into flow. So you should be dedicated to a backlog. If you're a person and you're working on more than one backlog, that's not a good thing. Stable. You got to keep the team together. Quit breaking it up. It's interesting. There's a difference between leadership and management. And I'm gonna make those differences because leadership's what's needed in the complex world. Management works in the complicated world, which is where, by the way, most MBA students learn. They learn about the complicated world. I was talking to, I always tell this story. I was talking to a guy from Haas MBA, Berkeley, professor there. He says, we do a great job of teaching people how to run an 1860s railroad. His words, not mine. Management works in the complicated world. You need leadership in the complex world. Stability. I need to keep them together because a stable team is going to learn how to communicate in certain ways. Some of you are married. Some of you have spouses, significant others that you've been with for a long time, right? Very easy to communicate with them, right? It is. No, Ely's not easy to. Wow. And you've been with them for a long time. It's not even easy. Imagine if you just met them, right? The point being is that over time, you learn how people communicate. You learn their styles. You learn their quirks, right? And so communication and feedback becomes easier. When Sutherland, I think it was Sutherland did a white paper on what he called hyper-performing Scrum teams. This is one of the myths of Scrum teams, is that, you create a Scrum team and all of a sudden they're going to be hyper-performing. The team didn't start becoming hyper-performing until they'd been together for at least a year, the same people. My hypothesis is that they got to figure out how they communicated together. They figured out their particular roles within the hierarchy, their pecking order, the storming, norming, performing. It takes time. If you keep splitting up teams, you're going to lose that. So as I said before, if you keep splitting up a team and you do it 4 times a year, you're taking a penalty about a month each. It's about so you're spending 33% of your time in the penalty box. I mean, that's a huge hit to productivity. And when I use productivity, it's not keeping people busy. Productivity being value over time. The more value we deliver over the shortest amount of time, the more productive we are. So it's a huge hit in productivity when we don't keep the team together. The 5th thing is cross-functional. And this is the one I said I might want to move up. Because here's another thing they're going to do. They're used to working in silos. You all know what I mean by silos. And we break things down by their expertise, which is great for you as the expert, because you get to work with other geeks in your particular expertise, but it's not good for the product, because what happens is we now have 7 different teams that need to touch the work before it can get delivered to our customer, because we have experts in this area that do the database work, and the product's not done until we have the experts in this area doing the middleware work, until we have the experts in this area doing the GUI, and the experts here doing the design, blah, blah, blah. Now we've just got waterfall. We're just doing waterfall in 2-week increments. We haven't changed anything really. And we call it Scrum and we call it Agile, and we check that box and we get our bonus. Isn't that what it's all about? Boss says you'll be agile. Oops, it's on my yearly review. Check. I got Scrum teams now. Yes, you do, but it takes 7 different Scrum teams to get the work through the system. What would happen if I took one of each of those people, put them on one team, so I had 7 different people who represented all the life cycle of the work? What happens now? Instead of 7 2-week sprints or more to deliver something, I can get it done in 2 weeks. So cross-functionality becomes really, really critical. It's also critical because of another reason. Is we usually talk about you need T-shaped people who have a deep experience, but also a breadth of experience. Why? Because I only got 7 people on the team, plus or minus 2, which is kind of the number you're looking at, right? Maybe I can't have all the specialties. I need people who can do more than one thing. For those of you who follow baseball, a utility infielder is more important to a Scrum team than a designated hitter. If you don't follow baseball, ignore everything I just said. Up to that point where I said, do you know baseball? The rest of it, keep in mind. Don't ignore everything I say. Right? 5 elements of a good Scrum team. I think they hold, I wrote that years ago. I think it still holds. Except for I might move cross-functionality up a little higher. You see it now, Scrum events. What are my Scrum events and ceremonies?
Yes.
You put them
now
in
we
chat
have-
or sing them out. What do I do? We just talked about it, right?
Daily Scrum.
One of them, daily Scrum.
Retrospectives.
Retro. I'm just gonna put retro because I'm lazy. Retrospectives,
Reviews.
reviews. Sometimes they refer to them as demos. What else?
Planning.
Planning.
What about refinement?
Just one more, folks.
These are actually there's one more. It's a sprint.
We just reheard sprint refinements as well.
Yeah.
Sprint
No,
review.
hold on, guys. I'm only one person here. Not that. Those are the 5 actual ones. I believe they're listed as events in the Scrum Guide. Okay, but that's why I say events. And stuff. I want to put events and ceremonies. Those are the events. I call these ceremonies because I think ceremonies are a good thing to know. You've got refinement. I'm going to break it down into 2. Backlog and story, right? Because they're really 2 different things. One of them is the body of work, the backlog itself, and then the other one is the pieces of the work that are going to go into the sprint itself, the sprint plan. Yeah, y'all with me? Y'all seem to be with me so far. All right, smart people, that's good. So we need to talk about these and what they mean. Here's the big tip. How many people want to be fit and thin and healthy? Raise your hand. Okay, if we want to do that, I don't think this is a secret to anybody. If we want to do that, we probably should spend some time in a gym, right? We should go work out. We should go to the fitness center, right? Jim doesn't have to. He just has good genetics. I don't know. Are you working out? What are you doing, Jim?
Oh, I go outside and garden, or I ride the bike, or outdoor activities, not in a gym.
Okay, all right, good enough. But let's say you have to go. Let's say you're a person and you want to go to the gym, so you stay healthy. How do you stay successful in it? Most gyms, what happens is people get all excited. This is kind of like agile transformation. You get all excited. You're all hopped up on getting healthy. You make your New Year's resolution. Man, they get you then, right? Every other channel, you're watching TV. And if there's not an election, oh my God, forget about those commercials. But if there's not an election, every commercial around end of December, beginning of January is for a gym, right? Why do they do that then? Because they're preying on you. Because now you're all hopped up. I'm going to make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to get healthy. when did the gyms are crowded. So if you are somebody who actually works out, you're going to take January off. You're not going to go to the gym. You're going to do what Jim does. You're going to do some gardening. You're going to ride a bike or whatever because the gym's too crowded. What happens in February? February, they say that's why they make all their money. You don't see a whole lot of advertisements for gyms. You might see them, there might be something maybe in June because the kids are getting out of school, so that's, it might remind you that you need to start doing something. But no, they know that you're gonna show up for a little bit and then you're gonna stop doing it. Why do people stop going to the gym? This is Larry's theory. I think it's because we run out of time. All you people said you want to be good, you want to be healthy and fit, right? But I can tell you the reason why I think you're not going to the gym is you just don't have time for it, right? I think that's what it is. You have to make time. That's the point I'm trying to make. I tell my son, look, cadence and scheduling is something that they don't teach you very much, and they should teach you. Everyone should know. We assume that. We assume that when people come to work that they've got this schedule thing figured out. Everybody's in charge of their own schedule, right? Here's my theory. If it's not scheduled, it won't get done. And that's what happens with the gym, is you don't have a cadence, you don't have a habit, you don't get it scheduled. And so you're doing it, right? What you're doing is different. What you're doing is not part of your habit. It's not part of your cadence. It's not part of your schedule. And you don't make it part of your schedule. So eventually it's just too much effort. So there's a thing, a couple books that are written about, I can't remember what it is, Nudge, I think it is one of them. You have to make your life as friction-free as possible. And you have to do that with your teams. You have to do that with your own life. You have to do that with your family. And the way that you make it frictionless or less friction is that you set up a schedule, a container for those things that you need to do. And then you work that container. You work that cadence, you work that schedule. Most people are not that good at it from my experience. Those are the 200 odd people that signed up for this class who never made it, right? Just not that good at scheduling. That's my guess. I don't know. I don't know their story. So it's huge, I think. What I'm trying to get to, and I'm probably overemphasizing, I'm beating the horse and it's already dead, and I'm going to continue beating it because it's so important. You need to set up a schedule. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the team composition. I'm going to try to optimize the team composition based on the restraints that I have, meaning I might be able to do some things, I might not be able to do anything. But once I've examined that, the next thing I want to examine is what is their cadence? Do they have a schedule? Do they keep to the schedule? So that's huge. So I refer to it, and I'm going to put it in, I'm going to write it down here. Cadence and investment. Those are the two words I use, cadence and investment. Investment comes first. We know this from when we think about normal financial investments, right? You got a 401k. This is another thing from Nudge. You know what most companies do now when you get a 401k, you sign up, you know what they do? They automatically sign you up. And they make you opt out. And we human beings are so lazy that majority of us don't opt out, because when they used to make it opt in, fewer people actually took advantage of it. Because my God, opting in is so much trouble, checking a checkbox on a form, right? And then once you're invested in there, you choose what your investment is, and then they take it out on a regular cadence, don't they? And you don't even think about it. You don't even think about it. That's a good system, right? When we don't have to think about it. We've set up an investment. Here's what we're going to invest on a regular basis, and they're going to automatically take it out on a regular basis on a schedule. And then, we'll check it every 6 months to see how much closer we are to retirement. But we don't think about it. You got to get to the same thing. You got to get to that almost friction-free thing. So the first thing you have to decide is, how much do I need to invest? Let's talk about Scrum. What do we need to invest? Daily Scrum, for those of you who know, how much do I invest in that?
15 minutes.
15
Most.
minutes per day. I'm going to take a 2-week sprint. I'm going to put that up here just to remind you, and I'm going to underline it. This is for 2 weeks. If you do 1 week to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, different. I'm just going to do 2 weeks. That's a normal kind of cadence. That's another thing you have to decide, right? Your sprint cadence. I decided it's 2 weeks. 15 a day. There are 10 days in there. That is 2.5 hours, right? Did I do the math right? You got to check me. I went to public school. Retrospective. They used to have these in the Scrum. The sprint we don't need to worry about because that's just that's the container. The retrospective. How much do we need to invest in the retrospective? Anybody know? They used to have this in the
4
Scrum guide.
hours.
They don't put it in there anymore. Marika?
4 hours.
They used to say, this is not in there anymore, by the way. They said use up to 4 hours, I think is what they used to. But that's for a 1 month sprint when they did, this is in the old days, by the way. So you're not gonna find it in there now unless you go back in history. For a 2 week sprint, it would be up to 2 hours because it should be half the time. You with me? Still
Yeah,
simple math.
maybe we had 4 week sprints.
When you had 4 week sprints or a month sprint, it would be up to 4 hours. Jim's shaking your head. Why are you shaking your head, Jim?
I'm pretty sure the 4 hours was for the sprint review for a 1 month sprint.
That's all right. I'm gonna get back.
I'll go
to
get the 20.
Retrospective is maximum 3 hours.
3 hours. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And it is still listed in the Scrum guide, Larry.
Is it?
Yep.
All right. So that's 1.5 hours. So you see where it starts to become chicken scratches. I'm going to change it anyway, so don't worry about it. So this was, we just talked about the review, set up to 4 hours. So for 2 week, it would be about up to 2 hours. And how much do they have on the planning? They had a lot, didn't they?
8 hours, I believe.
8 hours.
For a 1 month.
That's
8
for a
hours
month.
is correct.
Yeah. Wow. I'm having trouble doing the math. These numbers are getting big on me. So just what they used to, and I guess some of it's still in there again, and I'm not, I should probably spend more time with the new one. Is it 2.5 plus 1.5 plus 2 plus 4 equals? That's 10 hours, I think, if I'm doing the math right.
That is correct.
Yay. Mrs. Hickey would be so proud. Refinement activities. I don't know if this is in there, but I can tell you what it is because I don't want to spend too much time on this playing guessing games. 5 to 10% of your current sprint. You all understand that the refinement activities, this is where people get confused, are in advance of the next sprint, right?
Yeah.
I want you to understand that. That's really important. Let me draw this. This is my calendaring skills. This is a 1 month calendar. And there's 5 days, work days, right? This is week 1, 2, 3, 4. The way the cycle works is this, and I'm going to start with this would be, a sprint, 2 weeks. This would be another sprint. The actual life cycle of the work is different than the sprint cycle. And this is where people get confused. And some of you are going to be confused. So I'm going to try to explain this. The life cycle of the work is different than the sprint cycle. The sprint cycle begins with planning because I cannot start something without planning. That's your first activity. It ends with the review and then the retrospective, right? So what I get here. And then in between, you've got the daily scrum. That's your current sprint cycle. You with me? The refinement activities are actually in advance. So if this is my current cycle, this is review and retro, right? Daily scrum. I'm doing some refinement during this sprint. And what am I refining? I'm refining stuff for this sprint planning. So the life cycle of a 2 week sprint, if you follow the kind of normal, everyday, no emergency life cycle stuff, for the work is a month. Because we're doing the refinement activities in advance of the sprint planning. And then we're doing the work. And while we're doing that work here, we're doing the refinement in advance of the next sprint. You see the chicken scratch thing I'm doing here. That's really important. So how much of this refinement work do we do in advance of the sprint planning in order to be successful? And that's an investment as well. And what is that investment? It's generally 5 to 10%. So if I'm investing 5 to 10% of the current sprint, how many hours in the sprint? 80 hours, right? 2 times 40. It should be less than that, by the way. But we haven't gotten there yet. The 40-hour work week came to us from Ford, and we haven't changed it since. We're not exactly as ultimately productive on a 40-hour work week when we're doing knowledge work. It's actually less than that. Should be more like 35. We should probably do 4 8-hour shifts, and we'd probably be in good shape. Wouldn't it be nice to have a 3-day weekend? I'm running on that. Vote for Larry. Every week, 3-day weekend. 5 to 10%. If we're taking 5 to 10% of 80 hours, even for a public high school graduate like myself, that's 48 hours, right? Not 48, 4 to 8 hours. So what is my total investment? According to Scrum Guide and others, is 14 to 18 hours. That's how much time Scrum takes as a framework. I'm looking at some of you and you're giving me that look. No, not that look, Rob, the other look. How many people think they're going to get 14 to 18 hours investment from their team, Scrum teams, in any organization in the world as it exists today? Anyone? Probably not. I want you to keep this in mind. I'm going to do a little bit. I got to clear this out because this is just nonsense. The way I do things. I got to clear it out again so I can work from scratch. So we have daily Scrum, 2.5 hours. That I want to keep. That's 15 hours a day. We said we had retro and we said 2 hours. Most of you are never going to get 2 hours. I'm going to talk to the team. I can say, what can you give me? This is really a negotiation I'm having with my team. I say, can you give me an hour? All right, reasonable. They're probably not going to give me 2. Maybe we'll do an hour. Understand this is where you start is never where you end anyway, right? You can change it with the team, but I can't choose to do this. Now, when I take a team now, by the way, there's 2 things that I have as a prerequisite, or I try to make as a prerequisite, because sometimes the boss just says you're going to take this team and you don't get it. But if I get a choice, here's the 2 things I'm going to ask for. 1, go through my training. Because if you go through my training, you can understand Agile and Scrum in a way you didn't before. It's going to make you more productive when we start. So we need to do that first. Second thing, you're going to need to invest at least 10 hours in Scrum every week. And if a team says no, I'll say, good to know you. Good luck. I wish you all the best. I'm not the right fit for you. This has happened. I'm not making this up. This has happened where I've had a team and said, I need these 2 things before I can begin. They said, we don't think it's the right thing to do. And I said, good. Okay, great. I'm not your man. I'm not the one who's going to be your Scrum Master. So retro, I can usually get them to agree to 1 hour. I get them to agree again about an hour. You're not going to usually get more. If you can get more, great, right? Because they're telling us we probably should do more. And then the planning. Are you going to get 8 hours of planning? 4 hours of planning? No. I'm going to ask for an hour. So I've scaled it way down. But this is the reality of the situation. I've had teams tell me I can't give you 10 hours every 2 weeks. 10 hours, by the way, is exactly equivalent to in a 2-week sprint, 1 hour per day. That's what I asked for, by the way. This is the crux of my argument. I'm going to take an hour a day. So stick with me. If I'm going to take an hour a day, that means that the refinement activities would be roughly, this is 5.5, roughly 4.5 hours, which is actually in the 4 to 8 hours, right? If I add all this up, 10 hours. Your mileage may vary. You may choose a different number. Your team may choose a different number, but you need to come up with an investment number. What are we going to invest on a regular basis, recurring basis in Agile and Scrum, or in Scrum? Sorry, not just Agile, but Scrum as a team. Because if you don't get it, it's probably not going to happen. And the thing that you're usually going to miss is this refinement stuff, which I would say is pretty critical to being successful. 10 hours. 10 hours in a 10-day sprint is 1 hour a day. So what I go into my team and I'll say, how about this for a cadence? This is a straw man. You know what a straw man argument is, right? Let's start with this as my argument. And I've done this. I'm making my board here. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I was doing a 1 week or a 3 week or 4 week sprint, it would be different, but most stuff's 2 week. I got to do daily Scrum, 15 minutes a day. This block, by the way, is 1 hour. If you're wondering why I did this. Daily Scrum. When do we do the daily Scrum? Every day. I used to always love going into organizations and saying, we do our daily Scrum 3 days a week. Right? Daily Scrum every day. We might adjust it based on what we do that day. Then we have certain ceremonies. We need to make sure that those certain ceremonies or events are in our schedule, right? Very simple. So it's like we go to the gym. We go to the gym 2 hours a day. Monday, Tuesday is leg day. Right? Wednesday, Friday is arms and, whatever. What do we need to do at the beginning? Here's planning. So I got rid of this. Now I got rid of this. This is actually now planning I've cut down to 45 minutes. Right? This is actually unusual because usually on day one you won't do the daily stand-up, so it's really an hour, but that's okay. I don't want to confuse you too much. I just want you to get the thinking behind what I'm doing here. If I were, this is just a thought experiment, to do 1 hour a day, the last thing I would do is a retro. If I was following the Scrum guide directly. Unfortunately, if I were just doing 1 hour a day, I could move the retro. In the past, I could have moved the retro here. Now the Scrum guide says the retrospective is the last thing we do. So I used to do this retro on day 9 because I figured by the 9th day we know what the hell's going on, and I want to do that. And then I do the review last. They want to do the review at the end because they want as much time as possible to finish the work in order for it to be reviewed. Now, what Scrum Guide changed on in November 2020, and I got to reread it, but I believe I read this. Lord knows I've been wrong before, and my family is quick to point it out. That's why I love them. I've done this with teams now. I move the retro here. So now I've scheduled my retro and review, but I need to schedule extra time on this Friday, right? Or whatever day it is, the last day. So I'll schedule an hour. Oops, I'm erasing things. I'll schedule an hour for the review and an hour for the retro on this schedule. I want to keep it as close to possible as 1 hour a day. Why? Habit. I want us to meet the same hour every day. Habit. I don't want them to think about it. It's like every day from 9 to 10, I'm going to be here. And then we're going to do different things based on whatever day it is. Day 1, we're going to do planning. Day 5 is a little different because we're going to have extra meetings because they changed the Scrum Guide. What do I do in the middle is refinement. So I'm going to do backlog refinement first because I got to get it in sequence. And that may take 1 or 2 days, right? What are those activities? It's what we did on Thursday. Value, effort, sequencing. I might want to split some work up, but I've got to get the thing in order first. I got to get it sequenced first. So I'm going to spend some time doing it. And I've already got it on my calendar. right? Because I've scheduled roughly an hour a day, except for the 10th day where I've changed a little bit. Here, we're going to do some story refinement, right? And we're going to do it usually up until here. And then if I start to look at this, now I've got my retro and review on the last day where I've actually broken my hour a day. It's the only exception to an hour a day. It's a special day. And I've got all my refinement, because when I add up all the time, I have an hour for retro, hour for review, roughly an hour for planning, because we probably don't need to do the daily stand-up, so we might do it very quickly. And then I've got all the time that I need to do the backlog and story refinement. And this is real. I have 2 teams I work with today. I will be working with them later today. And they are on roughly an hour a day cadence. That's the investment, right? Once I get them to say, Larry, I can give you, in order to be successful, I can give you 10 hours a week, or I'm sorry, 10 hours every sprint, an hour a day. Then we just plan it. And with very little exception, which is the last day, we have that cadence. So it becomes very, very easy. This is one of the best things I've done for my teams, because now we're not having a bunch of these ad hoc meetings because we forgot to do the refinement, or we tried to schedule the refinement, but there was not a room available, or we tried to schedule the refinement and the product owner wasn't available. I can schedule this out until the end of time itself. And they know where they're going to be and they know when they're going to be. And this is hugely powerful for many reasons. I'm looking at time, making sure. Why is this powerful? As I told you before, we need to, in order to be successful in knowledge work, and I think you all get this, we need to get into flow. We need to concentrate. We need to focus. Right? So what I've done is I've set up a cadence. I'm drawing this all wrong. Let me redraw this. I've set up a daily cadence, because I said that's important. I mean, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 hours in a day. We're going to take 1 hour for team time. Could be the first hour that everybody's together. It could be in the middle here. It doesn't matter, right? Anywhere. And that's it. What does that mean? Look at all this time I got left over. Right? You with me? I mean, here's the irony. I don't know if it's irony. I don't know what the word for it is. Maybe irony. We need 2 things that are different in order to be successful in the complex world. We need 2 things that are different in order to be successful with software development. I think you agree with me. We need feedback and communication and collaboration, right? I can't tell you the number of times a week I say, gosh, it's amazing how much collaboration and communication is necessary in order to do good work in software development in the complex world. We've set that up, but we've set it up on a cadence. Let's say this is a schedule. From 9 to 10, I'm doing the team stuff, with the exception of the last day. So pretty much I know what my day is going to look like well in advance. That allows me to actually schedule the work that I do, because the other thing we need in software development and most knowledge work is we need the ability to focus and concentrate on our work. This is where we drop the ball a lot with our people, is we have a lot of ad hoc meetings. We have a lot of meetings that should have been emails, and we have all kinds of other things. So what I used to do with my developers is we would set up a schedule. So this is 9 to 10. This is 10 to 11, right? 11 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 8 hour day. Pick which slot we're going to put in this team time stuff. Once we do that, we don't have to worry about it anymore. And what we can do is we can start planning our time around it, the time to do the work. Because what I want to try to get from my team is 5 hours a day. If you have software developers, and I would assume with anybody in knowledge work, but I'm going to talk about software because that's what I know. If you have software developers and you can give them 5 hours of time every day to actually concentrate on their work, they're going to love you forever because none of them get it now. I doubt they get it now. That's why they come in early or stay late. The young people, they come in late and stay late. The old people, we come in early and leave early. Why? Because when managers are around, we can't get anything done. So you have to protect the team. So what we would do is we would take this block here and we take a 2-hour block and it would be focus time. And we would literally put I haven't done this with some of my new teams yet, but we would literally put a meeting on our calendar for 2 hours. So it would be really tough for anybody to interrupt this time. We're paying them. This is what we're paying them for in the end, is to be writing some code eventually, right? We take usually 2 hours here for what I would call lunch, and this is the word unstructured. You can read that, I'm sure. Should have been a doctor. We take 2 hours maybe for lunch, unstructured, answer emails, you know, whatever, do some training, whatever you had to do that you had to fit in, because you always have that, you know, a mandatory training that you have to take. You have things that you need to do. That's unstructured time. Maybe that's when you have, you know, your community of practice or something. I don't know. Unstructured. This is your free time. And then we would set up usually another 2 hours in 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, where we'd set another meeting for focus time. When we talk about sprint planning, we talk about capacity planning, I talk about this magic number of 5 hours. They've done studies for people who do knowledge work. In an 8-hour day, they get about 60% of their time on task if they're lucky. So 8 times 0.6 equals 4.8. So if you're doing knowledge work and you get 4.8 hours of actual productive time on task, that's about average. That's probably pretty good. So what did we do by setting up this cadence and investment? Is we've also allowed them the time to invest in focus time. Make sense? I used to be a software development manager. They actually, and a director of software development, they actually had people reporting to me. How very reckless of them. I did this for my teams, and it was the best thing I ever did. Right? We have some times we need to be together. Let's schedule those times in advance. Let's keep it at a cadence that's easy to remember. And then it's just my job as a Scrum Master is, okay, hey, today is day 3. What do we do on day 3? Oh yeah, we're going to do some refinement today. And I'm prepared. What are we going to refine today? Well, we need to put value on these 10 stories because they're new. We need to put effort on these 10 stories because they're new. So the cadence helps me as well as a Scrum Master, right? Because in the end, really, I have 2 teams, right? There's always a question from management. How many teams can a Scrum Master handle? Well, if you do things and you don't have a cadence and you don't spread things out, maybe you can only handle 1 team because your schedule is so you know, haphazard. But if you're very disciplined about your schedule, you can usually handle more teams. Right? Does that make sense? Questions on that? Cadence and investment, big thing, big part of what I do. Because you got to have that container first. We can't talk about what goes into the container until you actually have the container and you actually hold that container free and you actually do the thing. Right? If you're only doing your daily Scrum twice a week, then it's not a daily Scrum and really doesn't matter what you do in the container because you're not investing the amount of time you need. Doesn't matter how good you are at the exercise if you don't go to the gym, is what I'm saying.